Now, I've been thinking about leadership quite a lot because, again, I'm starting to rewrite some of my books. And for those of you who don't know, I wrote 10 books back in 2016, unknowingly, but I'm going through the other 6 or 7 because I want to make sure they're refined, and I'm going to basically sort of like rebrand everything. However, I've been thinking about this whole idea of being of service or being a leader that really is out for their group. And so I come across this Bible verse, I think it's Mark 9, verse 35, and it states that, "For anyone who desires to be first must be last and servant of all." So effectively, I'm like, what does that really mean? If you desire to be first, you must be last and servant of all. Now, I had to read a little bit back because I needed to understand what the context was. And I think it was some of the disciples who were trying to determine who's the greatest. So first and greatest is in the same context here. And so to be great, I guess we're looking at this from, well, what context are we looking at this from? Are we looking at this from a spiritual context? Are we looking at this from a monetary context? I don't know is the answer. What I do know is that the elements of that quote, at least, has some elements of being a valuable human being or someone worth of value based or in accordance to Jesus's mindset at the time. Now, this is not just going to be a talk about, Christianity and everything else, but this got me into the whole idea of servant leadership. Okay, what is servant leadership? What does that actually mean? Well, if you look at the literature with servant leadership, there are multiple different studies trying to understand and decipher what servant leadership is. And essentially, servant leadership is leadership that focuses on service to others, okay? Thereby creating high performers, other leaders, personal growth for self, and for those people that they're serving. Now, the word servant can be, I wouldn't say necessarily the right word because it may be associated with many ill sort of like connotations. However, it says something about the dynamic or the root meaning behind what the aim of servant leadership looks like. Now, it's interesting because, like I said before, there are many different definitions for servant leadership. And it has been slightly criticized because, well, you can't really empirically measure it in many ways because a lot of the descriptions have been what I call qualities that are good in leadership, but not necessarily things that can be measured, such as, I don't know, performance within an organization or monetary returns, etc., etc. So it sounds like it's an indirect effect of those things, but itself, it can't necessarily be measured. And so that's been criticized. In addition to that, there is this whole notion that servant leadership only works if you really understand what servant or service looks like. What's your capacity to understand that or to be known? In addition, for those who are being served, by the leader, they are reciprocal by nature and they have the right moral compass in order to respond to that servant leadership appropriately. So there are all these things I want to say first before I start hauling servant leadership as the way to go. However, looking at the way things are running, especially within the social media context for those individuals who are trying to make it big or do what they need to do, at the heart of it, you need to be a servant leader. That's my opinion, at least anyway. Now, this won't work for every single business, but in the context for what I've seen, it makes perfect sense. And so let's explore this in a bit more detail. Now, servant leadership, although practiced beforehand, was popularized by Robert Greenleaf in 1970 when he got inspired by the book, The Journey to the East. And so from there's been a flurry of different sort of, I would say, research to understand what servant leadership truly is. Now, if you think about what servant means or to serve, it is someone who is a devoted or faithful follower, or supporter of someone or a group. So someone who's a faithful or devoted follower or supporter of a group. So thinking about that, there is something connected to the cause of that thing that they are supporting or following. So thereby that servant leader is really invested in supporting and helping and making sure that value is provided for the group. So that's the first thing to note. Now, if we're thinking about leader or to lead, it is basically being a route or means of access towards a particular direction. Now, I know leadership is defined differently in Google, but I looked at the root word of lead. So if we look at that being a means or access or route towards a specific direction or destination, through support, through following, through helping or providing value to a group, that gives you an idea. It was John C. Maxwell who once said that leadership is simply influence. And so this gives a bit of flesh to the bones. Now, what does this say about the nature of human dynamic if servant leadership is something that works? Something that is being used by the top 500 or whatever it may be. It means that people are seeking value. People are seeking some sort of role model or something before they can actually do what they need to do with the right level of gusto. It's been shown in certain studies that the right servant leader is able to get the best out of people, and thereby people are going above and beyond to really do good and do the most for that specific leader or for that organization as well. So in essence, a servant leader is someone who serves the people. That's at the heart of what they do. Now, during one of my personal development hangouts that happen every Wednesday at 7:30 GMT, there was a lady on there, a young lady, who basically said upon our leadership discussion that leaders can't lead without people. They need people. And that sounds like a simple statement, but I was like blown away by that statement. It's true. Leaders cannot lead without people. And so if you think you're the leader because of your authority or your expertise or the hierarchical position that you're in, then yeah, you're right. That is like at the basic foundation of leadership. And again, John C. Maxwell talks about this in his framework. However, if you're seeing beyond that, if you understand that you are only there because of the people, okay, by virtue of your role, then the focus should be on the people. Really important thing to understand. Again, another individual within a personal development hangout, close friend of mine, basically said that in that style of leadership, love needs to be at the center of it all. Because if people see love, if people respond to love, then they're attracted to it. Because love is the creating and moving force. It's the reason for why a lot of things are here. And you could argue things about hate, etc., etc. But from a servant leadership standpoint, I can see why that makes sense. Love being shown in compassion, in support, in encouragement, in being vulnerable, allowing people to trust you and to build rapport with you in order to build that relationship, thereby creating that influence. And we can get into this whole argument of, is this true altruism? Is this manipulation? But if you put those things aside and if you focus on people, then the argument potentially becomes irrelevant from a philosophical standpoint. Again, this idea of servant leadership says something about the human dynamic or the human condition. Because humans love value, okay, in the form of connection or having a sense of meaning or obtaining a sense of freedom or doing good work. And so if you can provide value to them in order for them to grow as human beings so that they can supplement those different things, then again, you're showing elements of servant leadership. So what are some of the things that are benefits of actually having a servant leader? Well, the first thing is that they have an example to follow. They have a blueprint. Now, it's difficult to lead by example because sometimes you have pressures that, you sometimes succumb to. But if you lead by example, you're going to produce other individuals who are inspired by your values, your behaviors, your principles, your character, your outputs, okay? Because trust comes not only from delivering the work, not only from being in the environments that these individuals are in, but also from being vulnerable, being authentic, being yourself. Really, really important stuff about trust. So leading by example is one of the biggest forms of showing leadership, whether that's servant leadership or other forms of leadership. The second thing, which I alluded to already, is it creates more leaders because more people can see how it's done. And thereby, if you allow them to, through that growth and coaching style characteristic, you give them the opportunity to be in that position as well. The third thing I want to say is that it helps you improve and grow as a person. As you're managing all these different intricate changes and adaptations, you're having to grow. You're having to improve your self-awareness. You're having to respond to that by having the right level of self-management. You need to be in spaces where you understand how socially you respond to different people, so improving your social awareness, and thereby leading by example or influencing or managing conflict or whatever it may be, to be in a space where, again, you are leading by example. Whether you're seen as that figurehead or not, that's what you're doing through your actions. The fourth thing, again, I've spoken about before, is that it widens up the opportunity to be vulnerable and thereby creating more dialogue and communication and feedback. All really important stuff when you're leading an organization or a group. The fifth thing is that the workforce becomes more productive. It may not be a workforce, it may even be individuals within the space that you're serving as an entrepreneur. They become more productive, they want to do well, they're more passionate, and thereby their performance improves, metrics that you can measure. And this is stuff that you can do before and after, and you can understand what the gap looks like in the middle. That's the next thing. And the last thing I'll say is that the retention improves because, again, more people want to be part of this experience. You may even get more people into your space, whether this is a business or organization, and your reputation becomes improved as well because people are talking about the outstanding culture that's developed because it started with that servant leadership. Now, servant leadership is a form of hierarchy that uses a cyclical process, which basically means you still have hierarchy, but there's this element of collaboration. There's this element of we're in it together, okay? I'm not just, telling you what to do all the time. And of course, there are elements of management that leaders need to take on board. However, this is how it works. Now, rather than me just saying what I think, Jane Sipe and Don Frick developed 7 pillars to servant leadership in their book. And here's some of those pillars. Servant leaders are individuals with character, okay? People are attracted to people who have that enthusiasm, that dynamism, something about them, and usually that's rooted in their values. Number 2, servant leaders put people first. I've stated this before because if that is inherent, and if that can clearly be seen and evidenced, again, you're employing servant leadership. Number 3, servant leaders are skilled communicators. So they know how to influence, they know when to pause, they have great listening skills, they ask the right questions, they know how to encourage, empower and educate people towards a specific direction because they're clear about that vision and that vision is communicated amongst all. If anything, people are part of building that vision. Number 4, they're compassionate collaborators. They understand that working in silos is not the way forward, but it's about creating that right network, that right synergy, that right system to all work together. Number 5, they use foresight. How do they use foresight? Well, because they're great at serving other people, because they're in with the weeds, and because they speak to different people, because of their great communication skills, they're perceptive enough to pick up the sort of qualitative data, liaise that with the quantitative data, and understand what the culture or approach or direction may be going forward. Number 6, they're system thinkers, okay? So they use the works of Peter Senge, okay? They understand the idea of input, output, and process and how to liaise all of that stuff together. Because they understand that systems are not just built in technology, but they're built in habits and routines and values as well. They understand that approach. And the 7th thing is that they exercise moral authority. They understand that they need to lead by example. They understand the value of integrity, okay? Making sure that their word is their bond and that they have an element of authenticity. When I say element, they are themselves, okay? They're still professional when they need to be, but they are themselves ultimately. Their decisions are aligned to their core set of values, which are usually aligned to the organization. And if you can get everyone's values sort of aligned, you have a match made in heaven. Before I continue, I'd love to know what key qualities do you think are required to be a great servant leader? Leave your comments below. And so we can clearly see that servant leadership is definitely a go-to way of employing leadership skills. And of course, I'm passionate about leadership. I'm passionate about personal development. And so if you're interested in further developing your leadership skills, if you're a self-starter who's trying to build their own business or want to develop within their career, then check the comments below either for a coaching session or to hit our waiting list for a course or program that I'm trying to release, hopefully in the next couple of months. So keep tuned for that. If you like videos like this, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. And as always, my friends, understand, reach, and expand. Peace.